Okay. Hi! It's Lauren and Abby from Royal Vintage Shoes. And today we're going to talk about vintage sewing patterns. Sewing your own clothes in the vintage style or directly from real vintage sewing patterns. And kind of like some of the pitfalls, pros and cons. Let me see if I can find my notes here. My notes.
She's very professional today.
Super notes. So we're going to answer your questions about sewing with vintage patterns or sewing with vintage reissues or just vintage inspired patterns. Now, we are live right now. Are we live?
Yes, we're live.
We are live.
We're live.
We will not be live later.
No.
This is going to be...
We're still live. The phone's ringing.
Phone's ringing. Sorry, person, that we're not answering your phone call right now. Always when we go live, the phone rings. Phone rings, the mailman comes, the trash guy comes.
I'm hoping our mail girl would come today. She's nice.
So we're live right now, which means if you put your questions in the comment box right down there, they will come up on our screen and we will answer them on the air. But later, we keep this video on our news feed as a recorded video, and so we can answer your questions in the, with comments. We'll answer, reply to you with a comment, but we're not going to answer in a video live, obviously. Yeah. So you guys, if you have questions, please send them up and we'll answer them. So
we'll also be posting this video on YouTube when we're finished with it too. So that way, if you want to share it with people, but they don't have Facebook or anything like that, you can use the magic of the YouTubes.
Woo! And to share it, yeah. Okay, so sewing with vintage patterns.
I know nothing.
I know a lot. Okay, we already have a question from Amy. Do you ever buy vintage with the intention of studying, collecting, and not wearing? Absolutely.
Yeah.
To address that, buying and wearing original vintage clothing. This is actually a really good lead-in to my notes.
Thank you, Amy.
It's, as was put in that now famous article just the other day in Bazaar, right?
Yeah, I think it was Bazaar.
It's a full-time job to upkeep real vintage clothing. I especially, I'm going to give you a little TMI here, I sweat a lot. Sweat plus vintage clothes is a really bad thing because it tears out the armpits, especially if it's silk chiffon or any kind of silk. I just sweat right through it. Doesn't matter, dress shields, doesn't matter. And then I have to mend the underarms. I feel pretty crappy when I completely destroy a vintage dress in one wearing. And I don't have the time or really inclination to keep it up.
Mending sucks. Let's be honest. Mending sucks. It doesn't matter what century you're in, what decade you're in, you're in. Mending sucks.
Mending sucks. So with that being said, making my own and making your own vintage clothing. And what I mean by that is obviously, what we're wearing today is we've made these garments, but we've made them from vintage patterns or vintage inspired or vintage reissue and repro patterns. This is a cotton shirt. This is a cotton dress.
A very sheer cotton dress.
And we can make more of them out of, we can choose the materials if you get sweaty in them. I'm not like, oh my God, I just destroyed this one of a kind piece for that's 60 years or 70 or 80 years old. I just don't feel that bad about it. You can also adjust things like fit and, really make it to your size and suited to you. Choose the colors that you want. If you have a long waist or you need a full bust adjustment or whatever that is, you can still have your vintage clothes. A lot of real vintage is small, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. It's hard to find, and with the way that we Americans like to eat.
Sugar, pizza.
Carbs.
Yeah, all the pizza.
It's hard to fit into some originals, but I mean, I bought a 1920s. I was at an antique mall in my hometown of Louisville, Kentucky, and I found a gorgeous 1920s dress. It was a dress. It was this bright fuchsia velvet with beading on it, and I put it on once just because, I mean, why the hell not? But it was never meant to be worn. It was more like, oh, here it is. I have my own first real study piece, and so. I can build a pattern off of that. I can pull a pattern. Not that 20s patterns are hard to pull because rectangles, but but I could if it was there. And so, yeah, it helps that way. Yeah. I have a 1950s beautiful spring summer dress that my mom bought me that I wore actually to my wedding. I wore vintage. I had an all vintage wedding without even meaning to, and I've totally ripped out the underarm here, and I'm like,
it hurts.
It's now on a ball on my floor because I take care of my things.
So with that being said, vintage versus vintage reproduction patterns. So we have like huge boxes of patterns here for you, and I want to show you guys, this is a real vintage pattern from the 40s, and this is a vintage repro pattern from Wearing History. There's also vintage repro reissues. You're all familiar with these, Butterick vintage reissues, Simplicity's doing them now, Vogue has them. There are pros and cons to each of these, that we're going to talk about. So first, real vintage patterns. Okay, so these are real vintage patterns. Usually the envelopes are yellow, so they're easy to find. Instead of why are you laughing so much? They are. This is important. This is important because when you go to the thrift store and you go and fondle all the old patterns that Mima donated, you can tell right away what is an old pattern in that big stack just by the color of the envelope,
versus
the yellowing.
A late 60s, 70s pattern.
It's also yellow. This is white, very white. But sometimes the pattern envelopes, those who are familiar with buying and using vintage patterns will know right away, but sometimes they can be a little bit misleading. So real vintage patterns. The nice thing about these, some of these are 50s, some of these are 40s, is that when you sew these according to your sizes that are on the back, they actually fit you. They're made to that size. They fit you exactly the way that they're supposed to, as opposed to a vintage reissue, which has all of the modern ease, and it's made on modern blocks. So what they do is they take that old pattern at Butterick or Simplicity or Vogue, and they rejig it to their modern blocks, so it will fit us better.
Well, that starts a whole different conversation about old bodies versus modern bodies, and what a pile of baloney that is.
It is a pile of baloney.
Conversation for a different day.
It's not. It's a conversation for now, because 40s patterns.
We need Kathy Hay here right now.
We need 40s. Yeah, we always need Kathy Hay. Kathy Hay, come to us. 40s patterns, 20s, 30s, and 40s patterns. What I have found actually have a different suite of measurements that is a more realistic woman than 50s patterns. And what I mean by that is when I look at the pattern measurements on the back here, I have a 34-inch bust and a 28-inch waist, which is what 40s main company patterns have. Then we get to the 50s. Suddenly, we're expected to have a 34-inch bust and a 26.5-inch waist, or a 26-inch waist. That does reflect what's going on with the resurgence of corsetry and girdling and all of that to get the new look shape. 40s patterns fit me really well. 50s patterns make me want to scream. I always have to do a waist adjustment in these. But that being said, with that little adjustment, what you see on the pattern envelope is what you get, which is nice. It fits, if you match those measurements, it fits the way that it should, as opposed to these reissues, which have, 3, 4, 5 inches of ease in them that you have to take out. Sometimes that's a good thing. Sometimes if your pattern's a little bit too small and you know that there's that much ease in there, it's better to take something down than to try and let something out. But if you sew this up as is and you just expect it to fit, it's not going to fit. Like it does in the
picture, because she looks fierce.
Right. It's not going to fit like that. It's going to fit more like, well, if you look through the pattern books and they have a photograph of a real person wearing the garment, the sample garment, that will give you an idea of how it will actually fit you. Now, a word on that, the sample garment is always a size 10. It is a 32-inch bust and a 25.5-inch waist, at least for Simplicity. That girl's tiny. They require a size 10, at least Simplicity does, because then they grade up and down based on that. Their blocks are all 10, and then they have their computer programs, and they do all that magic.
All that black magic.
But if you have a garment that's made to those measurements, that's on a model that is those measurements, and it's looking saggy baggy, that's how it's going to fit you too. Yay! So in that case, take it in at the side seams, take it in at the darts, But it is a lot more work. Honestly, it's a lot more work to make one of these reissues fit you perfectly than it is to just use a real vintage pattern.
Can we talk about this one real quick?
Let's talk about the
This
Walkaway dress.
I've made this.
Who recognizes this dress?
Oh my god!
Everyone's made this.
It looks so pretty on the picture and the drawing.
It's a
like
drawing.
her adorable, like nipped in ways, and then you make it, and then you're just trying to like put the binding on. You're like, I wanna stab my eyes out with a plastic spoon. Just like right there.
I know Gertie has a lot to say about the Walkaway dress too. This is a famous pattern because it was, it's been in print now for many years. And it was used on the Great British Sewing Bee. They made this up. I think everybody has had a go at this. I never finished mine.
You're like, oh, screw it. Like,
yeah, because that much bias binding without a bias foot made like,
I don't even think I knew what a bias foot was. I was just like,
make one for my machine.
I hate my life. This is terrible. We have a Michaela. Oh, I'm going to butcher that last name. Liskova?
Michaela
wants to follow us. You can follow us on Instagram and right here on Facebook.
Right here.
Royal Vintage Shoes and Miss Royal Vintage on Instagram.
Yeah. And tune in every Friday for our live cast.
Yep.
So yeah, the Walkaway dress. It was a real pattern.
You walk away right off a cliff.
1952.
Like into a wall.
This is not one that we actually recommend for your first vintage repro dress. The reason why is because it just doesn't fit all that well. And now this actually leads into another point about vintage reissues. Now, I don't think I have my crazy 30s stuff from McCalls in here, but for some reason, the pattern companies nowadays, they go through their archive and they look for the most complicated.
Look, I found mine.
Oh, look, yeah, we have matching. The most complicated patterns to reissue. They got swoopy necks and crossover pieces and like all kinds of stuff going on. We got crazy, these are not the most simple patterns. But the fact is that real vintage patterns, for the most part, 99% of them are pretty simple. They're like the same thing over and over again, especially 50s dresses. Let's see if I can get the glare off of these. Same shapes over and over again. You got a front piece with a dart here and a dart here. Same shapes over and over again. You have a back piece with 2 darts at the waist, and you have a skirt.
And this has kimono sleeves.
And sometimes they don't even have sleeve seams.
You don't even have to set sleeves. That's magic.
Real vintage patterns are a lot more simple, especially in the 50s, as well as the 40s, than the reissues are today, which makes a really good case for buying and using them. Now, what are the cons? So there are pros and cons to. I know we've been kind of bashing on the reissues, but there are pros to this.
We've been hard on Butterick and their Walkaway dress. We have not been hard on the really, really well done and well thought out repro patterns that are made by people we know.
But we'll get to that. So the pros of using repro reissue patterns. One is that ease. Yes, it's going to be more troublesome, but if you need to fit stuff, more intensely, so if you don't fit that suite of measurements, at least, I'm sorry that the patterns are coming up backwards. We'll try and post some pictures later.
I don't even know how
I don't know how we're on a selfie camera.
Yeah,
so.
that's why.
Sorry about that. So having, fitment points where you have more fabric, more pattern pieces to work with to get it to fit you is actually a plus. If you're new to vintage sewing, you can go to Joann's and go to Hobby Lobby, or Hancock doesn't even exist anymore, but you can easily get these patterns and try it out and practice, on these patterns rather than, and this is going to cost, like if you get this at Joann's, it's going to cost $6 to $10. One of these is a little bit harder to find in your size. This has multiple sizes in it. This has one size. Most vintage patterns what survives are smaller sizes. This is going to cost you anywhere from $10 to $30 typically. If you get for 50s and 60s patterns, they're cheaper than like 40s, definitely cheaper than 30s. Yeah. You're working with new pattern tissue here as opposed to old pattern tissue. The instructions on a repro are going to be much more in depth than a real vintage pattern, which just assumes that you know things. Sometimes the pattern envelopes and the tissue inside is in bad condition.
Yep.
Sometimes the instructions are missing. Sometimes there's pattern pieces missing. So there is a case for using these vintage repro patterns. Now, as Abby brought up, not every vintage repro pattern is a bad pattern.
No.
There's really good ones.
There are fantastic ones.
One of them is
Start with Lauren.
Start with wearing history.
Wearing
I know this
history.
is backwards for you guys. I'm
And
really
glary.
sorry.
You might want to take that
And
out.
it's glary. I will take this out.
So anyone who follows us on Instagram, the dress that was posted on Insta this morning of me in the pink with the musical skirt dress, that was our outfit of the day post. And then if you follow our stories, I think I wore that dress on Monday.
Yeah.
That is a wearing history dress. So Lauren did some ready to wear clothes. I believe that pattern or something very similar to that pattern can be purchased.
I'm not sure.
If Marangola's like watching this, maybe she can comment and like
tell us.
clarify for us. But she does this.
Right. So I know it's backwards, but it says wearing history here. These patterns are fantastic. Lauren Marangola, who owns it and does this company and does these patterns, tests and tests and tests, and they are taken off of original patterns. And she doesn't do the stupid reblocking and resizing stuff that makes this go a little bit crazy.
Nah, girl.
Now, where is that blouse pattern? Now, I specifically recommend this is the smooth sailing pattern. It has trousers and a blouse in it. You can also cut the trousers off to make really cute shorts.
And this also comes in a digital pattern as well as a paper pattern. So you don't have to get a paper pattern. You can print it off digitally. I have it in digital.
Yeah.
So.
And I have it printed, and there's pros and cons to both of that too, but that's for another day. Now, what I want to point out about Lauren's pattern here, this blouse is basically this blouse. I have like 15 1940s blouse patterns that are all basically the same. So this looks all frilly and cute here, but it's basically exactly the same pattern shapes as this blouse. And this is the blouse that I'm wearing today. It's a fantastic pattern. It's very easy to make.
Yeah.
And obviously, I mean, because it's directly from a real, 30s, 40s blouse pattern, when you make this up, and you can make it in a gazillion different fabrics, you can make alterations and tweaks to it.
Yeah.
There, you've got your puff sleeves, you've got your correct collar, it fits really well. Bada bing, bada boom. So this pattern company, Wearing History, is fantastic. They have overalls, they have trousers and blouses. They have different kinds of 40s blouses. They have 30s patterns and Wardian patterns.
I have her pattern down.
This is the
I have the 19-teen suit pattern that I haven't made yet.
So she
but
does.
I'm looking forward to it.
I have actually made that pattern. It was great. She does a broad range of. Abby dropped some patterns. Broad range of styles. Styles for you to sew from. They're printed on nice, heavy bond paper rather than tissue, so you don't have to worry about tearing through the tissue. And as far as buying vintage patterns go, even if you buy the print one, you get a lot in this package. It's been tested. It's good. It's about the same price as a real vintage pattern, without any of the like, oh my god, I'm going to destroy this. So Rebecca says, lol. I'm one of the hardest body shapes to fit, according to my grandmother, so I like the reproduction patterns. I want to get some patterns from the other
companies.
Companies. Other companies to try. That is one of the things about vintage sewing that relates to buying vintage clothing and even buying repro vintage clothing. Repro vintage clothing is that if you have a difficult body shape to fit, you can make your clothes fit. It's it's a whole new world.
Yeah.
You have that power.
You have the power!
You've got the power!
You've got the power!
As opposed to just buying stuff and hoping that it fits and being upset when it doesn't.
We're weirdos.
Yeah.
Another company that, this is actually what I'm wearing. I just finished this dress. I started it, I think, probably in June, be like, I'm going to make me a dress and I'm going to be really productive and I'm going to get it done because woo! And then I was like, I got through sewing the zipper in, right? I got through like the most scariest, frustrating part of this whole process. And then I was like, I'm going to go watch Netflix instead. And not be productive. But anyways, it is, I'm so sorry, this is backwards, but it is the Decades Every Day by Decades of Style, and it is called the ESP dress. It's very straightforward to make. It's very comfortable. I just made the bad life choice of making it in a very sheer cotton. That makes me really self-conscious, and frankly, I feel like I'm naked when I wear it because there's a lot of airflow.
Patterns for vintage underwear that you can buy on Etsy, and you can make yourself
Or I
slip.
just need to wear like a nude stocking underneath because it's sheer. And I enjoy colorful underpants. But this is super easy to make. It comes in various sizes. So the largest measurement she has up to here is, let's see, a 46-inch bust, a 40-inch waist, and 49-inch hips. So she has it in A, B, C. I bought the 30 to 40. I don't remember. It's you cut it. It's graded with different things, and it comes out of nice paper.
Something to point out about this dress. And now just look at the picture.
Mm-hmm.
It has 2 waist darts and 2 bust darts. Well, a bust dart on each side, a waist dart on each side.
It has darts in the back too.
So does this. Darts in the back. This is pretty much a 1950s pattern with a full skirt. That's as simple as they were. Now you can embellish the crap out of this. You can cut different necklines, like
and on her Insta, she posts when people make things out of it.
Because you've got the power.
Your power.
Woo!
Yeah. So this is my first run with this dress. It went really well. I am a total noob when it comes to machine sewing. If you ask me to hand sew something, I'm like, yeah, sure. That, no problem. Oh, no big deal. I can pop that out in a day.
Make a super complex pair of 18th century stays.
Just fine.
Make a 1950s dress.
Ah!
Sewing machine.
Like we were sewing, and I was like sitting there like just going shit. And she was like, ooh, goodness. And I was like, I'm sorry, I'm just having a really hard time because I don't understand what interfacing is. Where do I iron this? Like, it was very hard for me. I don't even own pinking scissors.
We can't be friends anymore.
So this dress doesn't, no pinking. I'm just gonna let it go. We'll see what happens.
I'm not gonna let it go. Get out of my sight.
Let it go.
Oh, okay, I officially hate you. Okay, so, on my list of notes here, we covered some things about real vintage patterns, about sizing standards, simple is the best and most common, ease and fit. And now the last thing that we want to tell you about real vintage patterns, this is hilarious actually, oopsie, this ties in with what I'm about to say. Some vintage patterns are printed and some aren't. Specifically Advance, there's a pattern company called Advance. This is one of their patterns, which you can't see. It says Advance up here. Advance patterns are not printed, they are perforated. And what that means is that each pattern piece has all of its markings just in their punched holes. So you have to sort of like decipher, and there's a little, and on its deltour there's a little, this is what the large hole means, and this is what the small holes mean. And it's like, shut up. And you have to sort of like figure it out and, mark it out. Each pattern piece has like a letter associated with it. That's also just punched in there. There's no indication of what pattern it belongs to. There's no indication of, the pattern number or any of it. So if you lose a pattern piece from your perforated vintage pattern,
comments right after that.
Thanks, Maggie. Basically, don't lose pattern pieces out of a perforated pattern. Perforated patterns are super common for 1930s and 40s specifically. Advanced is one of those companies, and I'm not sure if Hollywood is also perforated. But the reason for that is Butterick actually had the
Maggie, don't message us. You're gonna mess up the video. Stop.
Had the patent on printed patterns for quite some time. Any of Butterick's sub companies, sub brands, they were the only ones that were doing printed patterns. And later that comes off, and now all patterns are printed and all patterns are multi-sized. So when you get your first vintage pattern and you're going to sew it, it's your size, and you're like, woo, this is amazing, and you open it up and there's no markings on it,
and then you cry and you eat your feelings with a bag of
pizza
or Doritos.
A bag of pizza.
Just make sure you wash your hands first before you touch the pattern again, okay?
Yes. So the thing to do when you have a perforated pattern is take it all out, lay out all the pattern pieces, look for the little letters that are punched in there, match it up with the ones that are on the back of the pattern envelope here. Make sure you have everything that you need, because sometimes somebody somewhere misplaced, back in 1946, misplaced that neckline facing.
Damn it, Ethel.
Found it again 6 months later and didn't have any idea what pattern it went to.
Oh, bless.
And so it just she threw it away. Never got back in there. So make sure they're complete. Not all vintage patterns are.
Bag pizza.
Yes. Bag of pizza, Lauren. Alrighty. Pizza. Rebecca says, eek, that would drive me nuts, especially since I'm a beginning sewist. So Rebecca, for you, I would stick to Butterick Simplicity for real vintage patterns and vintage repros, good vintage repros. Yeah. We want to give you a couple other companies as well. So Decades of Style, Wearing History. There's Miss Depew Vintage. I actually don't recommend them for beginners because you're scaling that out. Ava Dress, that's the one I'm trying to think of. Ava Dress, another company that is vintage reissues, traced off from original vintage patterns. Sometimes they come in multi-size and sometimes they don't. Another one is Vintage Pattern Lending Library, which is still going. Again, these are vintage patterns that are just been traced off. These are all really good pattern companies. Some of them come with caveats. So specifically, Ava Dress will say in their instructions when you get it, this has been traced from a real vintage pattern that may or may not have been altered by the original seamstress or person that sewed it. So they always recommend to make a mock-up. Sometimes you can make a mock-up, sometimes you don't have to.
It just depends.
Not really.
Just go straight into it. Just
Right. Emily says Ava Dress too.
Yeah.
Ava Dress is awesome.
Lauren Dearborn says attic copies.
Attic copies.
But not for beginners.
Lauren, I actually haven't heard of attic copies, so I'm going to have to check them out. Past Patterns also has vintage patterns, but they're older, so you can do like 1900s and 1920s. I think they've also got some 30s patterns as well. I have tried some.
Thanks, Nicole.
Thank you. So New Vintage Lady on Etsy. I have heard of that company and checked them out. Another really good company, because what she does is she makes these and tests them because she's a large busted girl. She makes sure it fits for the full bust adjustment, which is one of the trickier changes for real vintage patterns, or for any pattern whatsoever. So that's pretty much what we've got to say about sewing vintage patterns. If you have any more comments, put them in the comment box, and we'll read them off. And you can ask questions now or later. Again, you can and should sew your own vintage clothing.
It's good practice. It's a good life skill.
Yeah, it's a good life skill to have. It opens up this whole new world of possibilities.
Well, the thing is, even if you suck at it to begin with, no one's gonna care because everyone's like, "Oh my God, you made that dress! It could be the ugliest thing on the inside. You'd be like, "Oh my God, it's so bad." And it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. So make the mistakes.
Well, you have to learn.
Curse and yell and scream and cry. Eat your feelings when you're doing it. Bag pizza.
Bag pizza.
Hashtag bag pizza.
You have to start somewhere. A lot of comments we get on Instagram are, I wish I could make that. Oh, I wish I could. How did you learn to do that? And the fact is that we went and bought one of these patterns and you just started sewing it. You follow the directions. I mean, these reissue patterns have the full, what Butterick used to call the Deltour, right? Huge sheets of instructions of exactly how to do each of these things. And you'll get the hang of it. And what you'll find is that the same pattern, same things kind of go together in the same way. You will just memorize how clothing is made. Another cool thing about these is that this sleeve will fit in this dress. For the most part, you can mix and match. I'm laughing
because Maggie said hashtag bag pizza straight. But we also have a good question.
Well, to finish my thought, you can mix and match sleeves. You can add a pencil skirt onto a different bodice, and that's very creative. It makes it your own. You're making one-of-a-kind garments, but you do have to start somewhere. So start with a pattern.
You just gotta have the la-la bits to do it, and we all got the la-la bits to do it.
What are la-la bits? I don't have la-la bits.
Yeah, you do.
I don't know what you're talking about. You mean lady balls?
Yeah.
I said that.
Yeah, Gunther.
Okay. Oh, cool. So Emily says, what is your favorite vintage pattern, ladies?
Ooh. I don't have an answer for that. Well, I mean, I do, but it's a cheat. My grandmother, as most grandmothers were, was and is, well, she doesn't sew anymore. She was a fantastic seamstress. And I got my greedy little paws on, being the only granddaughter, greedy little paws on her prom dress from, she was born in 23, so what's 17? 23, what's that?
Don't make me mouth in my head.
40? 1940?
Yeah.
Yeah, 19, 40, 42, 40, somewhere in there. She made her prom dress, and she kept the pattern. And back before I gained enough weight eating bag pizza, I actually could fit into this, and I got so many compliments on this dress. And my grandmother, being my grandmother, it doesn't have the bolero. It wasn't straight. She actually made it, at least when I got my hands on it, it was a halter neck in an awesome cotton, printed cotton with large Polynesian flowers on it. And she did essentially a high-low skirt. So it's longer in the back and shorter in the front. And it is super cute. And I really want to make another one that actually fits me again because I loved it so much.
I don't know what my favorite vintage pattern is. That's really hard. I go for certain things. So one of my favorites is the Wearing History, anything from Wearing History, actually. You know what? The favorite, I do have a favorite. I don't have the pattern with me, but it was a Hollywood, original 1940s Hollywood pattern. And on the back, it recommended jersey fabric in the fabric suggestions. And I was like, ooh. Now, I had never sewn jersey, anything, not a t-shirt, nothing. And I went off to our local mill-end store, and I bought some jersey, and it was this lovely green, like, bamboo jersey, which was probably, like, really not anywhere close to original 1940s jersey. And I got the Colette book of sewing knits, and I got all the right, gear for it, and I sewed this dress in jersey. And it's so comfortable, and it looks exactly like the pattern envelope. Exactly. Kind of have to wear some underpinnings under it because guess what? Stretchy jersey shows all the rolls.
Hashtag bag pizza.
But get some bag pizza tonight.
Woo! Pizza polo night. What up?
But I'm very very happy with how it came out because I just did it. I just sewed it. I did the darts. I did the sleeves, and it is so 40s, so 40s. But it's jersey, so it has sort of this like modern twist to it that makes it very accessible and fun and real. For today's dress, but it's got a little puff shoulders, got a little, ruching here. It's got a big panel of ruching, down here on the abdomen. And I think that's probably my favorite pattern, but I tend not to repeat patterns really unless there's a significant difference. So I might make this blouse a couple times, but I'll try some other, kind of pattern later. So Lauren says, ooh, do a blog post on the jersey dress. I did. I'll post the link to it back when I went and stood on the train tracks and got bitched at for doing that. Just don't eat bag pizza before modeling it. I'll take those pictures in the morning.
Yeah. Also, do you want to talk about this pattern real quick since you just made this one and people have been asking about it on Insta?
Okay, since we'll give the pattern number, which I still can't read.
I can read it.
Okay, so we did some sewing last weekend, and Abby finished her dress, and I made this blouse. I didn't make the jumper, I just made the blouse.
Yeah.
And we did it in a day, so it was, less than half of a day. That's how quickly real vintage patterns can go together.
Yeah. And you did some hand sewing on this.
Just a little bit, just to slip stitch the collar on and all of that. But it's really straightforward. This pattern, this is McCalls
9046.
9046.
9046.
And I'll post a picture of this later as well. It actually doesn't even have sleeve seams, like shoulder seams. It's a kimono sleeve blouse, which means it's cut all in one.
And it's poofy.
And it's very poofy, and it's very fun. And it took, 5 hours, if that?
Yeah. Because we didn't spend the whole day sewing. It was like half a day.
It took 5 hours, and I conveniently did not wear it today. Deanna says, where do you find your vintage-inspired fabric for your clothing that you sew? That depends on what you're looking for.
I found this at Joann's. But I just bought I bought this before I ever had the pattern. I just thought it was a really pretty fabric. And when I decided to make this dress, and coming from Tidewater, Virginia region, it's really hot and humid there. And so,
thin cotton.
That's the see-through dress. Really thin cotton. But it's a dotted Swiss. It's really pretty. It's very festive.
And I'm wearing quilting cotton, but it's been washed a lot. But I think you're referring to where you get like wool crepe, rayon, that kind of thing, real vintage fabrics. Those are really hard to find. You're not going to find rayon and crepe. You might find rayon, silk, chiffon, that kind of thing at Joann's. We're lucky we have a mill-in shop here that is end cuts from the fashion industry, and sometimes you can find that at those places. But I would actually recommend Mood Fabrics online, They have just an enormous selection. Or if you happen to be in New York City, go to Mood of, not original, but fabrics that were used originally, like crepe and rayon and chiffon and charmeuse and that kind of thing. So Mood Fabrics is a really good place for that.
And if you guys remember our headscarf video, we talked a lot about the vendor Burnley and Trowbridge for our headscarves. They also are fabric suppliers and stockists, mostly for 18th century and early 19th century reenacting. But Angela and Jim it's almost, unless they get kind of tricked a little bit, all their stuff is 100% wool, cotton, linen, and silk. You get some beautiful worsted wools in there, so some good suiting wools, some good worsted wools, silk taffetas. I know that she has a gorgeous grapey, Merlot-y color silk satin, at least the last time I was there, unless it's sold out. And I hope it has because I really want some, but I haven't been able to buy any yet, but that's beside the point. But good quality linen, good quality lightweight cottons, more stouter cottons, things like that. Linen, same thing goes for Renaissance fabrics.
Yep.
She has some
natural
really pretty
fibers.
silks too.
Now, not all the fabrics were natural fibers. Obviously, rayon is a kind of natural, but man-made. You're also starting to get nylon in the 30s. Sometimes you see original 30s dresses that are like parachute fabric, which was silk, but then like some of them are nylon. Those are actually accurate fabrics, even though they seem a bit 70s. But we had a question, is it Moon or Mood? Mood, M-O-O-D. Mood. Right.
Like you're in the mood to make a dress and eat bag pizza.
Elise Lucy says Dharma Trading carries white or black rayon. Yep. Also silks and colors. Dharma Trading makes dyeable fabrics, and they sell the dye to go with it. Yes. So if they have rayon, white rayon, you can dye it whatever color you want, or you can even paint it. I think they do the painting as well.
You don't. It will look like a kindergartner did it.
Okay, well,
it would be very abstract.
Lastly, sometimes if you're really lucky, you can find original vintage fabric on eBay or in thrift shops.
Antique malls.
There are buy-sell trades groups here on Facebook that sell, vintage fabrics and whatnot. That can be a bit hard. Estate sales as well. You can look for real original vintage fabrics. Mm-hmm. Okay.
And then be prepared to sneeze your face off.
Yeah, there's things about it. With original... We're about done. With original vintage fabrics, you might have the same problems you have with original vintage clothing. Sweat through, tearing, especially under the arms. You might have pinholes in there or fading that might not be color fast or sun resistant. Mm-hmm. So
creases.
Again, with
for a while.
Creases that you're, where you have wear on the edge. So you kind of got to, just with vintage clothes, you kind of got to be careful with that. Mm-hmm. If you're not cool with all of the repair and upkeep or the hand washing that goes into original vintage clothing and vintage fabrics, cotton is your best friend. Use some new material for your stuff. Okay, one more question before we end from Marie. Vintage buttons and belt buckles, where to find them? Etsy and eBay. Mm-hmm. Etsy and eBay. It can be really hard to find them even in thrift shops anymore. Mm-hmm. Flea markets sometimes, depending on your flea market, they might have
where you are.
Yeah, you might have something. But when it comes to finding that stuff reliably, Etsy is probably your best bet because you just have a huge
and you
choice.
Can search and they'll ship it to you. Same thing goes for fabric too.
Yep.
I mean, Etsy is kind of a godsend when it comes to this kind of stuff.
Yep.
It's a dangerous, wonderful, magical place.
Okay, you guys. We've been talking for 40 minutes about vintage patterns and fabrics.
Now we're going to go eat some bag pizza.
Bag pizza! Bag pizza! And dinner and breakfast. So if you didn't make our live cast, this video is going to stay on the newsfeed. You can enter your questions again, but be aware that we are not going to answer them live because we are no longer live after this ends. You can skip ahead in the video to whatever you want. I shouldn't say this.
Backwards.
You can go backwards, to pick up the questions you want. But if you put questions in the comment box, we will do our absolute best to answer them with another comment. Links and pictures, you can request them for certain things that we talked about or other things. Thank you for tuning in.
Woo! Thanks, everybody!
I know we weren't doing crazy eyeliner today, but hopefully this information was useful to you.
Okay,
apparently. All right. At 2 p.m. Pacific Standard Time, we'll be on American Duchess on Facebook doing a live cast about a very, very, very big announcement over on our historic page, which is American Duchess, 2 p.m. And we'll see you there. Love you guys.
Love you. Bye.
Bye.
Mwah.